Hello again, and welcome to episode 5 of my video journal series. This one should be interesting. So, I guess, thankfully, wasn't a whole lot of crazy stuff going on in the last one, other than just me going through the motions and really showing, what I did after the things that I talked about in the second video journal. So yeah, this one, or this experience, I should say, might not just be a one episode kind of thing. I mean, it was 1 year, but there was a lot packed in. I mean, especially because it overlapped with kind of the first half of the pandemic. Not that the pandemic's over, but I mean, I'm vaccinated and several others are. Um, but yeah, anyway, I've been up since like 5:45 this morning, and it's like 6:30 p.m. now, and I've just been running around all day. Literally, uh, I got a 26-minute time on my 5K, 26 and a half minutes. I'm super happy with that. I'm running another one in a month. But anyway, so yeah, I do just want to say that I'm super grateful for where my life is at right now. And through all these difficult experiences, I've really cultivated a lot of gratitude. And even though I've kind of fallen into cynical thoughts quite a lot, and I've had to struggle a lot with like guilt and shame and other just really bad feelings of, where I'm at in life, you know, I am really grateful. It takes work for sure to hold that gratitude and to really feel it and embrace it and experience it. But that's just been so huge for me in terms of just turning my mindset around and just realizing that it's in here, it's not out there. How we feel about ourselves and the perceptions that we paint onto the world, because when we look out into the world, the way we respond is really because of our perception. I mean, you can take in the same information that's out in the world, filter it through your perceptual lens, and what you get out of that might be very different from what gets filtered through somebody else's perceptual lens. And so I've just really found that just by trying to say, I'm so grateful to have a loving home to come back to have food to eat, to have family that I can interact with, friends that I can call on the phone, things that I can do, the opportunity to, work out, go for a run, explore new opportunities, and not just be completely forced to do terrible things I don't want to do. That's a powerful perceptual reality, and I've found that is extremely powerful as a tool to shaping a positive mindset and really trying to manifest an attitude of abundance rather than scarcity, trying to live in a mentality of love and gratitude and abundance rather than fear and angst and anxiety and stress. I mean, we're all kind of subject to feel either side of that spectrum, but I think if you want to kind of be on the side of gratitude and love, it takes a lot of work and a lot of care for yourself. So, I've found that that's been really huge for me, is just trying harder and harder to take better and better care of myself. And so for me, that looks like, getting doctor's appointments. I need new glasses soon. That one's next on the books. But I recently got a haircut, got my teeth cleaned, all shiny, shaved, went to the doctor today and got an oil change and bought a bunch of healthy groceries, and all that stuff is really helpful. It's work, taking care of yourself, but it makes all the difference. So With that all being said, we're 5 minutes in now, and I will start telling the story. So, to kind of paint the background picture for all of this, you might have to go back to my last video journal, number 4, and in the last 5 minutes, I talked about the project I was working on and how I got involved in it and how I got hired. And I am going to mention names, the names of my boss and my supervisor specifically. And if this does end up getting back to me, or getting back to them, sorry, I just want to know, I want them to know that I am very grateful for the experiences that I had. And I'm not making this video or this video series to slander anybody's name or make anybody look bad, although it may appear that way. But I am instead telling my own truth and things as they happen to me, and again, like what that information was and how it all filtered through my perceptual filter, and how that played back into the reality that I experienced. And so I think by being truthful about that from my side, what I know to be my truth, it can be left up to the viewer to determine, what role I played in things going negatively versus maybe what role was played on the other side. Because when things did go negatively, I accepted a lot of responsibility for that. And I put it on myself because I try to be a self-critical person. And I try to understand that in situations where things go wrong, I probably have some role to play in that. I know I have some role to play in that. And so when things took a bad turn, I later apologized for all the role that I played in those things going wrong. That's not to say that I don't think that there wasn't other things that went wrong outside of me, but I've apologized. I've taken responsibility and accountability for my role in that, and I will continue to do so. But I am going to be transparent about what happened and the way that I see it and the way that I remember it. So, with all those disclaimers, let's get into it. So, oh my gosh, I'm going to turn my phone on silent. Sorry. Anyway, so as I mentioned, I got this job at the University of Maryland, and I had never lived outside of Arkansas. I was born and raised in Hot Springs, and I went to college in Fayetteville. And after college, as I mentioned in the last video, I lived in Northwest Arkansas area for about 9 months after my graduation as well. So I was in the Northwest Arkansas region for about 4 years. But at this point in time, I had never really ventured so far out into the world as to live in a different state. I'd visited some other states, but never really lived there. So that was a completely new experience for me. And I had no idea what to expect. When I got a job offer from the University of Maryland, I'd never been to Maryland, didn't know what Maryland was, didn't know anything about Washington, D.C. or city life or any of that. But I was trying to do whatever it takes to take the next step up in my career and develop. And so to me, at that point in time, location was not a primary focus as much as just doing what needed to get done for me to take the next step up in life, which was ultimately, working a full-time research job. And so I didn't really know where exactly to live, but I actually asked some people from Maryland that came into the restaurant I was working at, 11 at Crystal Bridges, about it because they were from there, and they were like, "Oh, we're from Tacoma Park, Maryland." I'm like, "Wow, that's right by where I'm gonna live." So University of Maryland is in College Park, Maryland, But anyway, so they told me that the Tacoma Park and Silver Spring area would be good if I was living in College Park. Now, that led me to get a job in Silver Spring, get an apartment in Silver Spring, which was not really a good idea. So I had a car that I was making payments on. I own it now, thank goodness. But I just didn't realize how much the high cost of living would impact trying to own a car in a city, especially if making payments on it. And as I mentioned in the last video, I had to kind of negotiate for more money, which still wasn't even enough to really afford to live on. But anyway, so owning the car in Silver Spring was really, really hard. And geographically, I was really not positioned well. I mean, I was about a 20-minute drive from the University of Maryland, but I had to pay for a parking pass. And then I also was working in Washington, D.C. So as part of this job, I was working at Children's National Hospital, which is like the 6th best children's hospital in the U.S. apparently. And I was working at their main hospital clinic as a special category volunteer, basically meaning that I had access to the systems, but I was paid through a different employer. And so that gave me a badge and access to email and all that good stuff, lab space, etc., and also access to clinics around DC that were under the Children's National sort of umbrella. So that meant that I needed to be in the Washington, D.C. area, ideally with a car, and also needed to be able to get to College Park. And with these clinics, I also needed to be able to go down past the Potomac River into the southeast area of D.C. because that was kind of a target population and area for us where some of our clinics were, which that all ended up being quite problematic. But I'll just put that out there, and I'll talk about why it became problematic more as the story progresses. Hopefully I can stay pretty good on like a timeline sequence of how everything happened. But yeah, so that's just a little bit of a preface as far as like the location everything goes. So just to be clear, Silver Spring, Maryland is north of Washington, D.C. Basically, Maryland borders Washington, D.C. right at the top, and so Silver Spring was right at the top of Washington, D.C., and College Park was sort of to the east. So it's like Silver Spring was up here above D.C., College Park, and then here's the whole D.C. area, and then down here was some of the clinics I needed to be at in southeast. So that was kind of the geographical situation. At this place I was living at, Silver Spring, I didn't like it at all. I am very much a fan of nature. I love getting out in nature. I'm out in nature pretty much every day, as much as I can. And maybe if I can, I'll take some clips of the farm I live on and post them up on this video. That would be pretty cool. So you can see where I live, but yeah. Hello. Just pausing here in this video journal to step outside and show you where I live. So it's probably going to be awkwardly cut in the middle of me like talking and showing this, but I wanted to include it as part of the story so you can kind of understand where I'm at now. Thankfully, I have this beautiful sunset to accompany me as I show you this, but I'll just give you a quick tour. So this is my parents' house, my mom and my stepdad that they built, in the barn I've been working on with my stepdad, and it's a 40-acre farm. I think I see my mom outside. And that's my car. It's very pretty and it's paid off now. This is the cabin that I live in that my mom and my stepdad built. And here's the neighbor's property. There's a bunch of horses that you can't really see. Maybe if I zoom in you can see the cows. This is my beautiful back porch. And this is all just the front yard of the 40 acres. Here you can see my home gym setup and kind of the back porch chilling area. Maybe this door is locked. It is locked. So, and then if you come through here, I'll show you a quick inside tour of the cabin. Here's some pretty flowers and some things I've collected. And thankfully it's decently clean in here. I try to keep it pretty clean. This is where I live. And so yeah, that's it. I was born in a national park, basically Hot Springs National Park. So I'm used to being just completely immersed in nature, and Silver Spring was the opposite. I mean, it was just industrial, city kind of grossness to me, all compact and concrete, and there was like never any sun out. I actually ended up getting a vitamin D deficiency because of lack of sunlight, which I'll get into that as well. But anyway, yeah, it was just hard being in the Silver Spring area. I will say that I had a roommate who was a great guy. His name was David. David, if you're watching this, I appreciate you. You were really good to me. But yeah, I ended up moving in with David. And so yeah, let me just actually start from the beginning, because it's pretty interesting how this all kind of shook out, me moving there. So like I said, I'd never been there, and I just kind of figured from these people's recommendation that I needed to be in the Silver Spring area. So I basically packed all I could in my car, and that was everything that I took with me. And my mom actually went with me. She really wanted to help make sure I get moved in safely, and she wanted to see the area for herself, so I agreed. So she drove up there with me. We got an Airbnb in Tacoma Park, which is right next to Silver Spring. And so she had to leave, actually, and catch a flight back. And it turned out that I wasn't actually able to move into my apartment after my mom left. So that left like a day or two where I was just up in DC with everything I owned and nowhere to stay. And thankfully, my coworker, I'll talk about, I'm not going to mention her by name, but my coworker actually agreed to let me stay with her in Washington, D.C. And at the time, I had been drinking a little bit more than I'd like to. I was going through this really difficult transition, and I was coming out of working 3 jobs where I would just work 6 or 7 days a week and work out, and it was really, really strenuous. But sometimes I would go out for a beer with coworkers and stuff. Not that that was over the top or anything, but once some of those jobs kind of faded out and I knew I was going to make this big life transition, I would have more drinks than I normally would. And so, you know, on the trip up, I was drinking as well. And so anyway, I ended up in Washington, D.C. The first weekend, right before I was supposed to go to work on Monday. And when I rolled up in DC, my coworker invited me into her house, was going to let me stay with her for a couple nights until I could get moved in to my own place, which was extremely kind, and I really appreciate that. I actually bought her a bottle of wine and wrote her a thank you note for letting me stay. But when I first arrived there, I was kind of getting settled in with her and her roommate, and she mentioned that she was going to go out, and the roommate was kind of like, "Oh, are you going to go out as well, Cole?" And I was like, I don't know. It kind of put me in this awkward position because I wasn't exactly invited. Um, but I was like, sure, I guess, which it was fine. But anyway, so it's like Friday night in Washington, D.C. for the first time ever. Um, Ended up going out and I was drinking bourbon on the rocks. And I ended up having like four bullet bourbons on the rocks, which was pretty heavy. And earlier in that day, I had eaten some Ethiopian food. I think it was like lamb, and I don't know exactly what happened, but it wasn't quite good. The flavor was great, but anyway, eating that food and then drinking all of that, um, yeah, it didn't turn out well. When we got back to the house at like midnight or so, I went to bed. I was sleeping on an air mattress, and I just got extremely sick. Uh, I think it was food poisoning. I mean, I've had food poisoning before, but um, this was really, really intense. I got really, really sick, some type of stomach bug or something, and it just made me extremely exhausted the next day. Um, I'm telling all this really to kind of paint the picture of my arrival. But anyway, so I got really, really sick, and the next morning, actually, I think it was Saturday night that we went out, and Sunday was the next morning, and I was supposed to start work on Monday. But anyway, so on Sunday, I was kind of getting up, having coffee, trying to decide if I was well enough already to just be fine and see if I was going to recover. Um, but I decided that I was going to take a short walk to a CVS down the road um, to get some Jello and Sprite, and hopefully that would help settle my stomach. And if you've ever walked on the streets of DC, they're very dirty and gross, and it was hot, and yeah, so that wasn't very nice. But anyway, so I walked maybe a half mile, got to this CVS with, bars on the door, and I got the stuff in there, and I'm standing in line, and I start to just feel like, oh gosh, like I'm gonna pass out. I started feeling really bad. Um, Finally got to the checkout line, was barely on my feet, got out the door, and I didn't know you shouldn't do this, but you shouldn't do this. If you're watching this, you'll learn this. But I had a Sprite, and I just took a big swig. Just, oh, I'm so refreshed. And then it just, like, bubbled up my stomach. And, oh, I'm sorry, this is kind of gross, but I walked across the street. It's like four-way, busy kind of intersection. And I just leaned over this pole, and I just threw it all back up. And this person that was walking by was like, "Oh, Jesus." Which, I'm sorry. I'm sorry to that person. That's probably not what they wanted to see, and it wasn't what I wanted to be either. So, anyway, that was tough. And I went back, and yeah, still wasn't feeling well. Unfortunately, the roommate, or the coworker and a roommate, both got sick as well. So I feel really bad, but nothing we could do about it, really. But anyway, so the next morning, like I said, was supposed to be my first day of work, and I ended up getting a Lyft because, like an Uber, if you're not familiar with Lyft, they're like Uber. I ended up getting a Lyft to College Park because I didn't want to lose my parking space because it's really difficult to park in DC. I mean, it's like you gotta parallel park bumper to bumper, and even if you can find a spot, like you're lucky to get that spot. And so anyway, I actually told them that I wasn't going to come in because I actually got sick. And then so stupid, like halfway through the morning, it's about 9:30, 10 o'clock, I decided that maybe I was feeling well enough to go in. Well, that morning at 10 a.m. we had lab meeting, and by the time I got to campus in the Lyft, It was like 10:30, and so I was in the lift, and I was just like, oh, this was a mistake. I don't feel good at all. I should have just stayed home. And I got there, and it was like halfway through lab meeting, and it was like 20 people in the lab meeting, and just like all my new coworkers, all my new lab members. And I walked in and just kind of quietly sat back in the corner against the wall. And at the end of lab meeting, Dr. Cronus Toscano, my boss, introduced me, and she's like, oh, by the way, this is Cole, our new research coordinator. Please welcome him. And Cole, if you'd like to say any words about yourself, you can. And so I was just tired and out of it and sick. And so I gave a very shy and poor introduction. And that went terribly. And then they were like, okay, well, there's going to be a bunch of information you're going to need to know, so just start reading. And then gave me like just all these grant documents and regulatory documents and scientific papers, and they're like, just start here, read all this. And so it's just like my first few days were just like pouring over all this super technical information. So that was an interesting intro to the whole experience. I'm going to pause it real quick. I'll be right back. Okay, I'm back. Okay, so anyway, so that was my intro to DC and the job in Maryland, and it was messy. And I'll just say with the drinking, that didn't continue. I actually quit drinking after that. If there's anything that makes you want to quit drinking, it's an experience like that. Even though I got invited out to drink a few times with my roommate, I would just drink water. I might have drank like once or twice, like going out, but pretty much not at that point. I hardly touched alcohol at all through DC, and then for like nine months after that. Right now, I'm even sober. I mean, I drank twice, I think, in the past like month, and it was just like with my best friend. But yeah, I don't really do that at all anymore. I found I can control it, but I still want to be able to do it sometimes. But anyway, so just to throw that bit out there. But so I don't just look like some alcoholic, terrible employee, because it wasn't the alcohol. I probably would have been more hungover than I should have been, even 2 days after drinking coming into my job. So I probably overdid it a little bit, but the alcohol just made like the food poisoning or the stomach bug or whatever worse. But anyway, so at that point, it was about October 1st, September 30th or October 1st of 2019, and just completely new area, of course, that I was in, and had to obviously buy furniture and build furniture from IKEA, get everything sorted out on that kind of wavelength. And anyway, so yeah, there was sort of the transitionary period of just kind of getting my stuff settled and getting settled into the job, getting my badge and getting all the right access and stuff, and getting my work laptop and all that fun stuff, and meeting people and getting to know the project. So like I said, there was a lot of reading over documents, and we really hoped to start recruiting people into the research project within about a month or two of me coming on. That was kind of the original timeline, but we needed IRB approval. And if you're familiar with psychology research or human subjects research, you'll know that to do any research at all, doesn't matter what it is, you have to go through an IRB or institutional review board, which is basically a set of 5 people that aren't involved in the project from different disciplines. who have to look over all your research. You have to tell them exactly what you're going to do, and then they make a determination: is this ethical or not? Do you need to go into more detail here? What exactly are you doing? Because if you don't go through this process, people can get harmed and taken advantage of and abused, and this has happened a lot. So yeah, research has had a messy history, especially in human subjects, with people getting severely taken advantage of. If you haven't heard of the Stanford Prison Experiment, look that up. That's a classic example, but there's several of them. If you've ever heard of Ted Kaczynski, the Unabomber, and what he went through at Harvard, that is just horrifying. I mean, they basically psychologically broke him down, but that's what it was like back then. And so anyway, I don't want to get too deep into that, but it's important to have an ethics committee, essentially the IRB, review it, and things that pique the IRB's radar and say we need to give this a very, very thorough look are things like drugs, which we had, and working with children, which we had. So, you have to be careful when considering sensitive populations, and then so it must go through a more thorough review process. And because this study was very, very complicated, we were using what's called a single site IRB. So with this study, there was several sites involved. Our site was the University of Maryland and Children's National Hospital. And then we were running this entire research protocol with 120 participants at the University of Maryland side in the DC area. Again, University of Maryland and DC are sort of integrated because they're right next to one another. But we were also running the exact same project in Seattle, Washington, through Seattle Children's Hospital and the University of Washington. So basically, they had 120 participants, we had 120 participants. We had our own $3 million grant. They had their own $3 million grant. But at the end of this, all the data was going to be combined and analyzed to get the final results. And this gave us two populations, ours, which was predominantly black, low socioeconomic status, and theirs, which was more white, Caucasian, and more affluent, which is good because you want a good diverse sample. But anywho, so we decided, or I didn't decide, it was decided before me, to use the single site IRB as a Seattle Children's Hospital IRB. They were the ones reviewing everything. And because it was so complicated, like even probably hearing it from me, you're like, this sounds extremely complicated. Well, it's just scratching the surface. So essentially, Seattle Children's was overseeing everything as far as their reviews go, but we also had to go through our IRB for some stuff and the Children's National IRB for some stuff, and everybody had to be in agreement that everything looks good, and we're working with a very sensitive population on like a 5-year, $6 million project. And so if it sounds like that's a lot, it is a lot. Our research protocol, our IRB protocol, which outlined everything that we were going to do, was 56 pages long. And this is 56 pages of highly technical information describing exactly down to the T what it is that we're going to do. And so Seattle Children's job was to review this with a fine-tooth comb, and if they see one sentence that they don't like or we're not clear enough on, they go here and they say, okay, we'll clarify what you mean here, or expand on this, or this doesn't sound good. Can you tell me what you're doing? And so if this is sounding like a crazy back and forth process, it is. And so the reason I'm going into all this detail about it is because it held us up a lot. And so we had to deal with this intense back and forth process, and there was just all this red tape And if it sounds kind of boring, I'm sorry. It is kind of boring, but it's important. And a lot of the times, this is the kind of stuff that people at my level of the process get tasked with. And again, it's your way of showing that I'm learning all this stuff and I'm willing to go through all of this for the sake of the research. But this was a main factor in holding us up, because not only did we have this 56-page research protocol, but there were several other documents as well, like a 24-page consent form, and lots of other documents. And so, one thing is getting the funding, and then another thing is getting the ethics review. So to get the funding, you have to write a grant, which is kind of a similarly in-depth process, and you basically tell a funding body exactly what you're going to do with your research and the team that you have and the research you've done before to support this idea. And so our funding was coming from the National Institute of Health, which is like the largest funding body there is, and is directly tied to the U.S. government, of course. This is a U.S. government body, and they're based in Bethesda, Maryland. But anyway, so we had secured our funding, but we needed to get this ethics approval. So the funding body, the NIH, they need to know that we are continuing to make progress in our research. So we have to tell them, basically our timeline for when we're going to have a certain amount of participants enrolled. We have to have regular checkups essentially with them, because they're giving us millions of dollars. Well, they want to know that we're not sitting around twiddling our thumbs. They need to see results, because after every year, they make a determination of whether or not this research is going to continue. They don't just disperse $3 million to the University of Maryland. Basically, what they did was they gave us $750,000, and that mostly was covering salaries, mine included, and that's all managed by University of Maryland on our side. So they give you your first year of funding, and then you tell them, or we told them the timeline that we had for doing everything. And like I said, our timeline was kind of after I started in October 2019, that within 1 or 2 months we were going to be enrolling. But again, we were held up severely by the IRB. But anyway, so after 1 year, if we just haven't done anything, well, we might not get funding again. I mean, you can work it out with the NIH, and say the reasons why you haven't made the progress that you initially promised, but, it was still a major source of stress. So, I was there, and my coworker who had the same job as me, we were 2 full-time people just at the University of Maryland side. It was, we needed to be working full-time on this, but there was a lot of hurry up and wait kind of stuff going on. That doesn't mean that we weren't doing anything, but it meant that, we were delayed in a lot of ways in our ability to actually do what we were trying to do, which was run the research protocol. And so, this is kind of the first layer and all the background to a lot of stress that got built up in this entire process. And so, so we were delayed. But there was still stuff to do. But because we were in this delay period, and my employers wanted me to have opportunities to develop professionally, go through professional development stuff, get opportunities to say, oh, look, I've done my own research, I've helped other people out, I've done stuff. They wanted us to get involved with other projects. And so one of the grad students in the lab was running a study on alcohol use in college students. and I was able to get involved with that. And the lab also has a clinic called Succeeds, which basically helps students with ADHD get organized and kind of get schedules going, and just kind of counsel them and provide support along the way. So I got involved in Succeeds, and I got involved in this college lifestyle study initially because I was given other stuff to do while we were waiting on our approvals to come through. And so essentially, that was kind of the first 4 or 5 months of my job. And not a whole lot of exciting stuff. What I've basically covered so far is kind of the important stuff. There was a lot of getting acclimated, getting materials ordered, acquiring like licenses. Like having a license to use a psychological measure, for example, creating materials like brochures for the study, forming relationships with our community partners, just like still a lot of planning and development kind of stuff, and then in the process continuing to work with the Seattle Children's Institutional Review Board. And so a lot of that covered up until the pandemic. And I'm going to end this pretty shortly because it's already getting pretty long, but obviously the pandemic shook things up. So it was, in March 2020 that it really hit the US and people had to start working from home. And like I said, it was about October of 2019 that everything started, and I was able to keep busy with this sort of administrative side and ethical side and community building side, and then getting to work on some professional development projects as well. But we were sort of held up at the same time by the ethics committee, who was very slow, and there's reasons for that. But anyway, all that kind of led up to us getting our official approval to get started, already way late, get started in March 2020. So things went downhill from there. And I will say that, up until that point, things had gone pretty great. I thought, I was in this very highly accomplished lab with this supportive environment, working with these grad students, working on these scientific projects, learning a lot, building relationships, being in a new community, and all that was going on. But, there was problems as well. As I mentioned, the finances were tough and the location was tough. So essentially I was starting to realize, because I was keeping track of where all my funds were going with a budget, that I wasn't going to be able to keep my car. Like a car payment of $200 and then like $70 worth of full coverage insurance in Hot Springs can turn into like $500 a month. In Maryland, when you consider the insurance is way more expensive, to park at University of Maryland, I had to pay $50. You got to get oil changes, gas, anything that goes wrong. And so I had started to learn some of the public transportation system. And if you are living in Washington, D.C., well, you can get pretty much anywhere you need to go by taking a train, what's called the Metro, underground and above ground train. You can get pretty much anywhere you need to go by train. A combination of train and walking, or after you get off the train, you can get on an electrical scooter or a bike, a rental bike. So, it's kind of easy to navigate around there. without having a car. But again, I was in Silver Spring, Maryland, which was right outside of DC. And there was this train line that went straight up to Silver Spring, and Silver Spring was basically it was the second to last stop up north of DC on this line. And so if you wanted to get to College Park, where the university was, you had to get on this red line in Silver Spring, head down, and then get on what's called the yellow or the green line, and then go like back up northeast, which made it about a 50-minute train ride to College Park. But then it was like a mile and a half from where you get off the train to the actual lab, because it hadn't really been designed, like the whole train system hadn't been designed with the University of Maryland in mind, which was changing. They're developing that now. But anyway, there used to be a shuttle that would pick you up from the train stop and take you pretty close to the lab, but that went away with COVID. But anyway, so it was feasible to get from my apartment to University of Maryland by train, even though the route was kind of bad. And then there was also a bus. It took about an hour to get there. There was a bus station by my house, about a 10-minute walk, or by my apartment, about a 10-minute walk to the University of Maryland, and then you could get on that shuttle and go up. But, or actually, I think you got off the shuttle, or got off the bus and then walked like 10 or 15 minutes. So it wasn't very efficient, basically. But that was what I had available, right? And anyway, so there was a whole issue there with not being able to afford the car, and then trying to figure out, okay, well, I can take this train route, basically. But then also, like, I was trying to go to the gym. And so one of the things I really like to do that I'm not able to do now is rock climb. I'm very big into health and fitness, and at that time that was kind of my main thing. Right now my main thing is kind of running and hiking, but at that time I was going to the rock climbing gym, which was basically in the opposite direction of where I was living, to College Park. So it was like I was living here, and then way over here was work, but if I'm living here, then way over here is the gym. And so if you can imagine, I'm here, and then to get to work I'm going here, and then if I wanted to go to the gym after work, I've got to go basically right back to where I was at the train station by my apartment, and then get on another bus to go to the gym. And then that was like an hour and a half trip, and then it's like 45 minutes back via a city bus to get back to my apartment. And so that meant that in the morning, on public transit, I was going 1 hour and like 15 minutes from my home to work, and then I would, at the end of work, I'd have 2 heavy backpacks, my work bag and my gym bag. At the end of work, I would go from work to right by home to the gym, work out at the gym, get back at 9 o'clock at night. At that point in time, I would have just enough time to eat a salad real quick and a protein shake, and get in the shower and go to bed, wake right back up at 6 or 6:30 the next morning to do it all over again with work. And I was going to the gym 3 to 5 days a week. And so as you can imagine, that was an extremely difficult schedule. And what I didn't mention was that around Christmas break time, I got rid of my car. Basically, I sold it to my mom. She took over payments, bought me out from it, and I decided, okay, I'm just going to do public transit. But it was really, really difficult because of the routes that I just described. And so I had to come back up to Maryland after Christmas break in a rental car. And from there, because basically I drove down and then I took a rental car back up and then dropped it off. And then from there, my life was just going straight to work, and then a ton of time on the bus, and then a ton of time on the bus back, and gym and sleep. And so as you can imagine, I mean, this is already super stressful. I'm on a really tight budget. Like I said, I had the vitamin D deficiency, so as you can imagine, I mean, bus to inside a research lab, sitting staring at a computer all day, to then back on buses for an hour and a half, to then a gym where you're inside, to then back. Like, it was just like 12, 14-hour days of just being inside all the time. And even when I was outside, most of my body was covered, so I wasn't getting exposed to sunlight. You might be able to tell, like, I'm very tan right now because I spend a ton of time in the sun. But anyway, so that was all really bad. I wasn't getting enough sunlight. I was on this really tight budget, and I was spending like 3 hours a day on public transit. I would try to be efficient, like listening to podcasts or reading on the bus. I mean, it's kind of hard to read on the bus. And sometimes you don't want to take in any more information after just like a day of like intense kind of research and sitting on a computer all day. But you know, they wanted me to obviously be like going hard at it, like eight hours a day at work, trying to like squeeze it out of me to like get everything done. And I already had all this extra stuff going on outside of work. And, you know, I'll just throw this out there that Jordan Peterson, he's a huge idol to me. He talks about how, especially with like creative work and high intense concentration kind of work, you can't really do that for more than 3 hours at a time. And most people who say that they can are lying. And I mean, really, like, no checking your emails, no stopping, like hard focused work, 3 hours at a time. And so for a day at work, that would look like 3 hours, you know, in the morning, kind of wind down, check emails, have lunch, maybe go for like a 20-minute walk or do a 10-minute meditation, and then go back and then have about 3 hours that was a little bit more kind of slow pace, less intense focus and concentration. So I was using like all of my cognitive capacity basically, and trying to use as much as I could as well on kind of doing that. And then there was this, you know, all the public transit, trying to take in more information, learn things that I want to learn about, and get my workouts in, have my fun at the rock climbing gym. And so that was all a lot. And I was on a year lease at the place in Silver Spring. And so basically I mapped it all out on Google Maps and figured out that if I live in this one neighborhood in the middle of DC that's really close to some of the train lines that I needed to be on, that I could get it all, like all four of the clinics that I needed to be at via train, or I could walk to them. I could walk in 15 minutes to the Children's Main Hospital Center that I needed to be at. I could take a train to College Park in about 45 minutes where the lab was, and then, like I said, there was a shuttle that actually quit running, so if the shuttle wasn't running, that was like a 30-minute plus walk, and they wouldn't let you ride e-scooters on campus, so that also made it very difficult. But anyway, but I could get there in like an hour and a half on a bad day. And so I could get there, I could get to all the clinics, I could walk to the campus, and as well, there was another gym actually under the same company, Earth Treks. There's another climbing gym that I could go to if I went southeast on the train to go to Crystal City, Virginia. And so anyway, I was just like, yes, it's the perfect solution. I can get everywhere I need to go if I live in this neighborhood called Columbia Heights. And Columbia Heights, I was told, is a developing area, historically not a great neighborhood in terms of safety and stuff. So, but essentially, I went on one of these Facebook groups and I was like, hey, my name's Cole. You know, I like to rock climb and I work this job and blah, blah, blah. Some about me stuff. And I said, I'm really looking for a place in Columbia Heights. You know, I'd like to spend about $800. As I mentioned, I'm making $42K. Well, that's not very much for rent in DC. But anyway, so a guy reached out, said he had a room in this row house, which if you've ever been to DC, or maybe you haven't, a lot of the houses there are these really thin houses that are like stacked up right next to one another, but they're kind of tall up, and it's a good use of space, especially because you can get a basement under it. So a lot of times I have a basement, and then they'll have like 3 or 4 bedrooms, or maybe 3 stories in one of these row houses. And so this guy reached out, and kind of a family owned and operated thing, because the father of my would-be roommate actually owned the place and had owned it for like 30 years. But anyway, I got talking to this guy. He said the room was $1,000. I think it was $950 originally, but $950 plus utilities, which is about $1,100, which I'll let you do the math. But if you take $42K and divide that into 2-week paychecks and then take about 25% out for taxes, it doesn't leave you very much money. Basically, one paycheck was all rent and utilities, and then the rest had to be used for like food, phone bill, gym, etc., which left extremely little money for any incidentals or errors or anything. Basically, it was paycheck to paycheck, and if anything went wrong, I wasn't going to be able to afford it. But anyway, I'm skipping a little bit ahead here because right as the pandemic had set in, you know, about 5 or 6 months into the job, March comes around, and I had figured out, hey, if I can get out of my lease in Silver Spring and I can move to this place in Columbia Heights, then I can save myself all this time and trouble and energy that I'm spending right now living in Silver Spring and trying to use the public transit system, which is just not worked out for what I'm trying to do at all. I can save myself so much time and energy if I can just be right in the middle of DC. And so I actually talked to my landlord and my roommate, and I said, hey, like, I really need this kind of to work out because I really need to be in this area for my job. Nothing personal, but is there any way we could work something out to where I could end the lease early at like a 6-month lease? And he said yes. Actually, the landlord said yes, and my roommate, awesome guy, again, David, thank you, figured out a different living situation for himself as well. And I had found this place in DC. And so I was planning to move into the place in DC. And so all this stuff happened, and then the pandemic hit. And it started to become working at home. And so I would just work from home on my laptop. Nobody knew what was going on. I didn't think I had any job security. I couldn't add up in my head how research was going to be a priority in a pandemic and how I was going to be able to maintain my job. So I was thinking, oh gosh, I'm about to lose my job. I'm going to get on unemployment, blah, 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 but I don't know. But, you know, so I was trying to, so right as all this happened, I'm trying to move to DC, right? And I had already had it negotiated with my landlord to move out of my place in Silver Spring and to move then in to the place in Columbia Heights. And so essentially what happened was I was working from home for like 2 or 3 weeks, and I'd actually gotten sick. I don't know if it was COVID, but we had this really bad thing going around the lab where I was coughing hard and sneezing all the time and really bad sore throat. In retrospect, it wasn't really COVID symptoms, but some sort of virus. But anyway, there was no way we were going back to campus. Nobody knew we were going to get back. I had to move out, and I was planning to move in, and then I was on like my last couple of days of being able to stay in the place in Silver Spring, and my prospective landlord in DC essentially told me like that I needed to get a COVID test to be able to move in. And if you remember at the time, COVID tests were very hard to get, very scarce, and they took like 5 to 7 days to get results back. So basically there was going to be no way I could have gotten my COVID test in results in time to move into the place in DC. And basically I got the impression, because like I said, this was kind of a family operation, I got the impression that they didn't want me to move in there because they didn't want another person bringing COVID into their family, because, you know, the son that he ended up being my roommate later on, but he would be around his, you know, older dad, who would be around their grandparents, and me bringing myself into that situation in the middle of the pandemic was going to put them at risk. So he didn't want me to move in, and I talked with my landlord in Silver Spring, and it was actually a condo that was being privately rented out, and he was going to have it renovated, and already had all these contractors and everything that he had contacted, and like he needed me out of there, and he was not happy with the idea of me staying longer than I originally said I was going to stay after we decided that I was going to move out. So you might see where all this is leading. I didn't have anywhere to go. Like, I couldn't move into this place in DC. I couldn't stay in the place in Maryland. So I had to come back home to Arkansas and work remotely. And that's really when things started going downhill. But like I said, this is getting really, really long. So I'm going to pick back up on the next episode at the point when I moved back to Arkansas and started working the job remotely. But I know this has just been like, a lot of technical and crazy information, and like you might not care to hear about all the regulations and the transportation system and funding and blah blah blah, but you know, if you're interested in my story and you want to learn about what all happened leading up to that, you know, all this is important. So even if you don't watch it, you know, to really understand the depth and the breadth of like everything that happened, you have to understand these factors of COVID and stress, because of whether or not we can continue to get funding and timeline delays, you know, due to regulatory bodies. And so if that just doesn't interest you, I'm sorry. If it does and you've listened to this point, great. You know, I'm sorry I don't have any dirt to talk about. I know people like to hear about the crazy stuff. Like my second video journal got a lot of views, by far the most, because I said, oh, there's some stuff I probably should mention. It's probably fine to mention everything I'm talking about now, but you know, if I'm talking about stuff people probably do want to hear about, but isn't great, like looking for me, that's probably going to be in the next one, but it's important to paint all the background in this one. So, so long-winded, I know, but thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.